In this video, I'll walk you through the steps of getting this Flask app here working in a Docker environment. So if you want to use Docker for whatever reason, like you like the idea of your dev environment, your production environment being very similar, if you like the idea of isolating dependencies, if you like the idea of having code as configuration, or any of the other reasons why you use Docker, this video is for you if you are working with Flask. So what I'm going to do here is I'm starting with this Flask app that I've built on my local machine, no Docker environment, just like a virtual environment, and then I wrote the code. I'm going to move this over to a Docker environment. So first, let me show you what the app is like. And it's a simple to-do list. So you see I have record video and edit video here, and I'll add another one, let's say publish video. Very simple. So the nature of the app isn't important. It's just important that it's a Flask app. So before you can even put Flask in a Docker environment, you need to have Docker installed on your machine. And the easiest way to do that is just to download Docker Desktop. So if you just search for Docker Desktop, the first link is going to be the page where you can both download it and you can create an account so you can sign into Docker Desktop when the time comes. And then once you install Docker Desktop and turn it on, it's going to look something like this. So this is mine here. No containers and no images here. But as we go through the process of building everything, we'll see some stuff here. So just make sure Docker Desktop is up and running before you try to do anything here. So the first thing I need to do to convert this to a Docker environment, let me shut off the app, is I need to create something called a Docker file. So the Docker file just has all the instructions for building the environment that the code is going to run into. So the first line is going to be a line that tells Docker, like, what image are we going to build on top of? So you could start from scratch, but it'd be a waste of time for most apps because there's a lot of stuff out there that's already created for you that you can build on top of. And in our case, that's the Python image. So by typing from, I can say from which image I want to build on top of. And I'm going to say Python : and then a version. So the Python 3.12 image, which is the latest at the time of recording this video. So everything is going to start with a Python image. The next thing I want to do is I want to create a work directory. So an image is basically like a mini operating system. So it's going to have a bunch of files in there to begin with. And I want to create a directory to separate my app from the rest of the operating system files. So to do that, I'll create a work directory called /app. So it's going to create a directory in the image that will hold my app called app. The next thing I want to do is I want to bring my code into the environment. So there are two things that I want to bring in. I want to bring in the requirements.txt, and then I want to bring in all of the code. So let me do both. First, I'll copy requirements.txt. So the first argument is the local file, and the second argument is the location it's going to go. So I'm just copying requirements.txt into the image, and I'm naming it requirements.txt. And then I'm going to do another copy dot. So dot meaning copy everything in the current directory and put it in the work directory in the image. So the reason why I'm doing this separately is because the way that Docker works is anytime something changes on one of these commands, everything that happens after it is going to run again. So our requirements.txt is going to change less frequently than our code, which is everything in here. So if we just change our code, we only have to worry about this and everything below it running. But if we change requirements.txt, this is going to run again, and then this is going to run again. So it just saves a little bit of time. So what I can do before copying all the code over is I can install everything from the requirements.txt. So I want to run a command, and remember this is just like an operating system. So I'm going to run pip install -r and then requirements.txt. And then once I have that, the last thing I want to do is I want to create a command that will run when the container starts. So the image is basically like the definition of the environment. And then when you run it, it turns into an active container and some command is going to run. So that command can be defined here. So you can put it in a list like this, and anywhere you have a space, you just create like another item in the list. So I want to do flask run -h. And what's really important here is you bind it to 0.0.0.0. That way you'll be able to access the app. So once I have this, my first Docker file is done, and I want to build this. So I can do the docker build command -t to tag it, and I'll just call this my Flask app. And then the Docker file is in this directory. So I'm just doing dot, and it's going to build. So as this builds, you'll see each line of code that's in the Docker file getting run. And then after everything's installed and everything is copied, it will be ready to run. So the Docker image has been built. As we can see here, my Flask app appears in Docker desktop. So we know that worked. And to run it on the command line, what I can do is docker run -p. So -p will just map a port inside of the container to an outside port so I can access what's inside of the container, because this is no longer running in my local environment. It's like running inside the container. So I need to get in the container through port 5000. So just 5000, 5000. I want to use port 5000 in the container, and I'll access it through port 5000 on my local machine. And then the name of the tag, my Flask app. So I'll do that. And we see it turns on. And if I go back here and refresh, we see that the app still works. So we still see the to-dos. So this approach works fine. And if you were immediately going to deploy this somewhere, like on some service where you can host a Docker image, this would work pretty well. But I think you should go one step further and integrate Docker Compose, which is just as easy to set up as this. It's just an extra step. So let's go ahead and set up Docker Compose here. And I'll create a file called docker-compose.yaml. And the Docker Compose file has a services part to begin. So the services are all the things that are going to be running. So in this example, it's going to be the app, eventually a database, and a tool to view the database. But for now, I'm just going to use the app. So what you define here on the second line is a name for the service. So I'm just going to call this app. This can be whatever you want. And then inside of app, I need to specify a build location. So build dot just means that look in the current directory and find the Docker file to build this particular service. So this Docker file that we just went through building is going to be the thing that I want to actually build from. Then I can specify some ports. So the ports is similar to the -p that I put on the command line when I did Docker run, but this time is going to be defined in Docker Compose, because Docker Compose is going to capture all the information that I will put on the command line here. So for ports, I can just do dash and then 5000:5000. So exact same idea. I want to map the 5000 port inside of the container to 5000 on my local machine. Once I've done that, I can go ahead and save, and then I can do Docker Compose up. So what it's going to do is it's going to build a new image, and it's going to give it a name based off the name of the service here. And we see here we have Flask example. So we have Flask example as the name of the directory that I'm in, and then app. So Flask example -app is the name of the image that's created. But if we go over and refresh this, we see that the app is still working. So this Docker Compose kind of captures everything that was in that Docker run, but it's in code now. So it's very easy to inspect and see what's going on. It's also very easy to change if you ever need to change it for whatever reason, which I'll do in this example. So one thing we notice is debug mode is off. And oftentimes when you're developing code, you want to make some changes to a file. And we know with Flask, like once you make a change, the development server will detect that change and restart for you. Well, if you want that to happen in a Docker environment, you have to do a couple of things. So first, let me go over to Docker Compose. And what I want to define is something called a volume. So there are a couple volumes that we'll be dealing with in this video. So the first is a volume where you map files outside of the container to inside the container. So the files that are outside of the container are the files that I have here on the left on my local machine. And then the files that are inside of the container are the ones that are actually run with the command, right? So what I can do here is I can say dot. So dot represents the files on my local machine, colon, and then the location of the files inside the container. So we know the work directory is /app. So we have /app here. And all this means is that these files will map directly to the files inside the container. So as I change the files on my local machine, that's immediately reflected inside of the container as well. So I can edit the code as I go along, even though it's running in the container, because Docker gives me this tool here where the files will be mapped over for me automatically. And Flask won't update automatically unless debug mode is on. So let me set an environment variable. So I can just do environment, and then I can give a key for the environment variable. So Flask debug and just 1. So that will make Flask debug turn on. So what I can do is Docker Compose up again. And now we see the debugger is on. So I have Flask debug as 1. And now let me go to dunder init.py and just save. And let's see if it detects a change, and it does. So we see detected change and restarting with stats. So now if I'm developing this project with Docker, I can edit the files on my local machine, and that will immediately be reflected inside of the container. So I can use both Docker and my local machine when it comes to running my Flask app. So normally when you're using Docker Compose, you don't have the commands inside of the image anymore. So let me go ahead and comment that out. And over here in the services, what I can do is I can say command, and it's going to be the same exact command. So flask run -h 0.0.00. Okay, so let me go ahead and stop that. And because I changed the Docker file, I need to rebuild everything. So I can do Docker Compose build, and it's going to go through and rebuild the Docker image. And then what I can do is I can do Docker Compose up again, and it will start. And you see here that it's still running. So now that I have this, let me add another service. Another good service to add would be a database. So what I can do is I can create another service. I'm going to call this service DB. And instead of having build, I'm going to create this service from an image that already exists. So this image is going to be the Postgres image. So someone has created the Postgres image where Postgres is already installed and it's already going to turn on. We just have to say that we want to use it. So I have image Postgres here. And then I need to define some environment variables. So for Postgres, I can define the user. So Postgres underscore user, I'll just say user. And then for Postgres underscore password, let's say secret. And then for Postgres underscore DB, let's say Postgres. So the name of the database will just be Postgres. So let me go ahead and save this. And actually, before I do, what I want to do is I want to bring in a tool to view the database. So this is called adminer. So I'll just call this adminer as the service name, and it's going to use the adminer service. And I need to open up some ports. So the ports in my case are going to be 8080. Right, so that's the port that adminer is running on, and I'll show you how this works in a second. So what I can do is I can do Docker Compose build or Docker Compose up. It will automatically detect the new services, but Docker Compose build and now Docker Compose up, and we see adminer and DB are both pulling. Those are images that are stored on Docker Hub. So let's give it a second to bring those images into my environment. Okay, so we see here DB1, it says database system is ready to accept connections. So what I can do is first, let me go over to adminer. So I'll go in my browser. Let me open up a new tab. And I'll go to port 8080. So this here is adminer. And what I'll do is I'll change the PostgreSQL here. The server is going to be DB. So when you have Docker Compose running with multiple services, what happens is Docker Compose will create a network for you. And the host for each service is the name of the service. So the host for my Flask app is app. The host for the DB is DB. And the host for adminer is adminer. Inside of the network. Outside of the network, I can continue using localhost here. So inside the network, my database service is named DB. So that's the host for it. That's the server. And then my username is user, password is secret, and database is going to be Postgres. So let me log in here. And we see I can log in, but I have no tables. So let's go ahead and create those. So the first thing I need to do is I need to update my environment variable to have the correct location for the database. So this is going to be PostgreSQL. And the location of the database and the username and password is going to be user:secret @db. And then the port is going to be 5432 and then /Postgres. Right. So this string here represents the connection string to my database. Also, another thing I need to do is I need to have some kind of library to connect to Postgres. So I'll just add it here. So cyclepg2 binary. And I spelled that wrong. cyclepg2 binary is the interface that I'm going to use to connect to Postgres. So I just added that to my requirements.txt. So what I'll do here is I'll do Docker Compose down just to delete everything. And I'll do Docker Compose build. So what this is going to do is it's going to rebuild my app container because I changed requirements.txt. It's going to install everything again. And then it's going to copy the files over. So now let me start up everything. So Docker Compose up. And what I want to do is I want to put this in the background. So Docker compose up. And let's just go here and refresh this just so I'm logged in. So when you take everything down and put it back up, the session expires. So let me just log back in. So we see here I have no tables. And let me go back here, and I want to go into my apps environment and run a command. So to get into the environment, I can do Docker compose run in the name of the service. So the name of the service that I'm using is app here. And I want to run the bash command. So bash will give me a terminal like this. So bash. And now I'm inside of the container environment. So if I ls here, I'm in the app directory. Let me just go outside the app directory. We see here all of these operating system folders, and then we have the one app directory here. So this is why I created the work directory here. If I didn't create the work directory, then all my code files and everything would just be in this directory, which is not the best place. So let me cd back into app. And what I want to do is I want to do Flask shell, and I want to do db create all. And we see I have a connection error when I try this. So what we can do is we can double check the connection string. So user secret at db, okay. And 5432 is the typical Postgres port. And looking at this, I think I have an extra slash. So what I can do is I can exit out and I can just try again. So let me exit and let me take everything down. And then let me put everything back up again with -d. And I'll just try that again. So Docker compose run app bash. And inside of run app bash, what I can do is I can try Flask shell again. And I can try db create all again. Okay, so this time it worked. So I just had an extra slash there. So let me go ahead and exit this. And now let me go back here and refresh. And log in again. So secret is my password. And now we have one table called to do, right? So if I refresh this here, I see no tasks. But if I say record video as the first task and add here and refresh, in the table, if I select the data, we see record video is the first task. If I add another one, edit video, add it here, edit video appears in the database. So there's one last thing I want to show you. So let me take everything down. So Docker compose down. And I want to do Docker compose up again. And let me go over here and refresh. And I'll put in the password, log in. And now we see I don't have a table anymore. So the reason why is, so I'm getting this error, meaning it can't select the table because my to-do table is gone. If I go to public here, we see I no longer have a table. So after I put the Docker compose environment down and I deleted the container, what happened was it wiped out all the data in my Postgres instance. And the reason why that happens is because there's nothing to save it. So to save this information between runs, what I can do is I can create a volume. So down here after the services section, I can define a volume section, and I can just supply a name. So there's nothing that has to go after here if you don't want. So I'll call this db data and then just colon. So this is just a name, but you could have other settings. And now in db, what I want to do is I want to supply a volume. So volumes, just like the one for app, but this is going to work a little differently. So dash, and then I want to put db underscore data. So that's the name of the volume on the left. And then the location that this maps to. So for Postgres, all the data is stored here. So var lib PostgreSQL /data. So what happens is db data is just something internal to Docker that is managed by Docker, and it's going to save everything into that location. So even if I take the container down and put it back up later, this is going to persist and it's going to continue to use the data. So let me go ahead and stop everything, and I'll put it up again and go here. So let's log out and then log back in. So user, secret, and Postgres. Log in here. And I'll just create a table here. My table. And let's say ID. Right, so I'll save that. And now we see, if I go here, I have one table called my table. So let me go ahead and put everything down. Docker compose down. And then let me do Docker compose up again and log out and log back in. So secret and Postgres. And if this worked properly, I should still see that table there. So let's log in and we still see my table there as a defined table in my environment. So those are all the steps that you need to go through to get Flask up and running in a Docker environment along with the database. And anything beyond this is just adding on to the Docker file or adding on to Docker Compose. So there are still more things you can do, but this is like the simplest possible setup. So that's all I want to show you in this video. If you have any questions about anything that I've done, feel free to leave a comment down below. So if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you have not subscribed already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching and I will talk to you next time.